I'd spoken earlier about the imperial reserves of gold, much of which were handed over to the Czech Legion. I'm going to do a bit of a history lesson here. The Czech Legion were made up of Czechs and Slovaks who had been subjects of the Habsburg Empire, that's the Austro-Hungarians, and they had wanted independence. Ultimately, they got it. But they couldn't get it by fighting for the Austro-Hungarians because they would have remained these sort of second-rate subjects of that empire. So many Czechs and many Slovakians decided that their best bet might be to fight for the enemy. So they migrated across the border and were accepted by the Tsar as an independent force known as the Czechoslovakian Legion. This was the country they wanted to form, Czechoslovakia. For many years, they fought in the vanguard of the Russian forces and were, by all accounts, some of the best troops the Russians had. So the best troops the Russians had weren't even Russian. Then the Bolsheviks take over. The Tsar abdicates. And these Czechs and Slovaks realized, in some sense, they've backed the wrong horse. They're no longer wanted by the Bolsheviks. They aren't certainly wanted, except perhaps to be executed by the Austro-Hungarians. So they're stuck. They can't go home. And then the Russians don't want them. So what do they decide to do? Well, the Bolsheviks gave them a choice. Lay down your arms and your lives will be spared. But knowing the record of the Bolsheviks, even at that early stage, that wasn't much of a bargain. So the Czechs and the Slovaks, let's just call them Czechoslovakians, decided to make one of the most remarkable journeys that had ever been made. They decided to walk the entire length of Russia along the Trans-Siberian Railroad to Vladivostok, get in ships, sail all the way around the world to France, rejoin the fighting on the side of the French. It's one of the most unbelievable journeys ever made, and they actually made it. Along the way, they captured trains and turned them into these armoured marching columns. The Czechoslovakians were straggled out over an area over 1,000 miles long. The Bolsheviks at no point had forces great enough to stop them. They were I'm skipping a little bit of history here, but they got hold of a huge chunk of the imperial reserves from the city of Kazan, and they were advancing towards Vladivostok, where the gold would then be handed over to Admiral Kolchak. Admiral Kolchak at this time had instead of backing the Tsar, who was abdicated and at this point in prison and would soon be assassinated, decided to form an independent Siberia. Things went wrong, both for the Czechs, but mostly for Admiral Kolchak. Right around Lake Baikal, the largest lake in the world, there are a series of tunnels. The Bolsheviks realized that even if they couldn't fight off the Czechoslovakians, they could collapse the tunnels with a relatively small amount of dynamite. This they threatened to do. When the Czechoslovakians arrived at the Baikal tunnels, they had with them both the gold and Admiral Kolchak, whose campaign to launch an independent Siberia had at this point failed. The Bolsheviks said, "Give us the gold and give us Kolchak." The Czechs had no choice but to do this. Admiral Kolchak was tried and executed, and the Bolsheviks got hold of enough gold to at least begin bankrolling the revolution. There are many stories about the fact that the Czechs may not have handed over all of the gold. And Siberian Red is a story about Stalin having fastened onto one of these rumors and ultimately sending Pakala back to Siberia, in fact to the very gulag to which Pakala had been exiled in the beginning of the revolution by Stalin himself, before Stalin came to absolute power. Stalin has to return to the gulag in order to investigate this rumor of gold. And also to satisfy what has become one of Stalin's great obsessions. So effectively, Pakala has to relive one of his greatest nightmares in order to solve his latest case.